Good evening everyone and welcome to another live stream event from the Primary Health Network. My name's Scott White, I'm the Communications Manager with the Primary Health Network. And before we do start our live stream this evening, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we're broadcasting tonight, right across our region and possibly beyond our region. So certainly like to acknowledge those custodians across all the lands that we're broadcasting tonight and pay my respects to their elders past and present. Really happy tonight to have Matthew Milne with us from the Rural Adversity Mental Health Program. And Matthew is going to be talking to us tonight about adjusting to a new way of life. Obviously during COVID, there's a lot of changes. Certainly we're well into a long period of isolation, which obviously brings with it a lot of mental health challenges. So Matthew's going to go through us tonight, tell us what some of those challenges are, and perhaps give us some of the tips and some ways that we may be able to cope with those challenges. So thanks very much, Matthew.
Thanks very much. So I'm Matthew Milne. I work for the Rural Adversity Mental Health Program as a coordinator. I'm based in the Hunter, New England local health district and cover both the Hunter and the Upper Hunter Valley areas. There's also 5 other coordinators who work across this area, and there's 20 of us based across the state. And together we cover all the rural and remote areas of New South Wales, providing mental health advice, information, support and links where we need to. If you're interested after tonight, we're in upskilling your staff with some of our other training packages that we offer. Head to our website and use the postcode locator to find your nearest ramp coordinator, and then give them a call and have a chat through some of the things that we might be able to offer. As Scott mentioned tonight, I'm going to be talking about how we've adjusted to our new way of life during the COVID scenario that we find ourselves in. I need to mention that tonight we're going to be using Slido for people to ask questions. So if you have your phone handy or computer, head to slido.com and use the code RAMHP for Rural Adversity Mental Health Program to log in and ask questions tonight. As we talk about adjusting to a new way of life, keep in mind that I'm adjusting to a new way of doing things. I'm much more used to standing in front of a large crowd rather than speaking to a camera and 2 other people in a room. So this live streaming method's completely new to me, and I do apologise if I make some mistakes and need to revisit some of the things that I go over. I realise that webinars can be a little difficult to stay engaged with, so please use Slido with the code RAMHP to ask questions as we go along, and I'll get to them. I'll be monitoring them on my phone here so we can address them as they come up. I'd also like to mention that today is International Nurses Day, so thank you very much to all the nurses who are tuning in tonight. It's 200 years since Florence Nightingale was born, and I think it's a really special thing to be presenting this presentation on such a special day. So tonight we'll be going through a few things, a few statistics and just a basic breakdown on COVID-19 and how those challenges have unfolded for us. I think we've been bombarded with this information from the media, so I'll keep it short and sweet. We're going to talk about recognising and understanding anxiety in other people, as well as working with stressed and distressed people. And then we're going to finish up with managing our own anxiety and building self-resilience. With an increased workload or lack of workload for some of us, anxiety can be a big thing that impacts us as practitioners. So we need to make sure that we are firing on all cylinders and managing our own anxiety in this time. So the first COVID case was diagnosed in both Sydney and Melbourne on the same day, on the 25th of January. And then there was about a month or two where we were watching the world, sort of waiting to make a bit of a decision about what our next move would be. Australia was really lucky and in a strong position as an island because it meant that we had no land borders and we could greatly control who was entering our country. And on the 19th of March, the government began enforcing those travel restrictions, which involved closing our borders to non-Australian citizens. Residents could still come in at that time. On the 22nd of March, the states followed suit and they began closing the internal borders to restrict travel, mostly for holiday makers and people, to contain the impact on each state. The freight wasn't affected, so we still did have a little bit of travel going on. And then the next day, on the 23rd of March, that was when the big life changes occurred, where the government came and basically told us that all non-essential services were ordered to be closed, and they were going to restrict trading and implement some social restrictions, which at that point in time was a 4 metre square buffer for people who were in an enclosed space, and a 1.5 metre buffer when you came into contact with someone. In Australia, as of yesterday, we've had a total of 6,927 confirmed cases in Australia, and 6,031 people have recovered. On a more local scale, in the Hunter New England Health District, we've had 277 cases identified, and at this point in time, no one is receiving care for coronavirus or COVID. We've had 228 recoveries and 4 lives lost. It's important to note that nationally, with our recovery rate being fairly significant, that people do get better. It can be very easy to become caught up in people dying, especially when we look across the world. And we tend to take our eye off the positive side of the amount of people who have recovered. The relatively low numbers in comparison to other countries in the world show that our strategies and actions that we've taken to slow the virus have been effective, even though it's come at some cost to our general well-being in life. New South Wales has hit a milestone today with no new cases identified in the last 24 hours, which is a good sign. Challenges for daily living occurred almost instantly when the government told us that things were going to change, and the impact was felt pretty largely, and that included me as well. I felt that impact a fair bit in terms of what I was doing for work. It seemed that government regulations were updating overnight. You would go to bed with one set of rules and wake up to a new press conference and another set of rules, and that left us feeling bewildered and sort of scrambling to keep up with what was going on and making sense of what was happening. Government closures of industries saw a significant amount of people who were either out of work or on reduced hours, and other people might have been working home from the first time, which presented challenges in establishing a workspace, using technology effectively to connect with colleagues or their workplace, and being home for 24 hours a day, especially when we were told that we weren't able to leave our place. Social distancing and isolation were a new thing to us, especially in Australia where we're used to having so much space. That meant that we weren't able to connect with our families or support networks when we were restricted from movement. A lot of people were confused about the language of what social distancing actually meant. Some people thought that wasn't clear enough. So we had to work really hard to understand what that meant and how that was going to change our life. We saw reports of people panic buying and stripping shelves in stores. Schools were disrupted, and we had mixed messages coming from the federal and state governments about schools. In New South Wales, we were pretty clear that the schools were going to remain open, but other schools decided to close their schools, which created confusion and anger for parents, and also a burden to homeschool children while juggling their own changing work conditions. We're also challenged with a number of closures of events and venues with no indication of when they were going to open back up, which created a stark sense of a really changing and uncertain world for us. So along with these challenges to our life, the emotional toll we were seeing was rather intense. It brought about many different feelings which were leaving people unsure about what they were experiencing and whether that was normal. The effect was not just experienced by adults, but also children as well. Children were home from school, which would have been a pretty large change for them, and they were away from their friends, which could be scary. Some of the emotional aspects that we needed to deal with were uncertainty about health primarily. We were hearing that a lot of people were dying, and when people were surveyed, they were mostly concerned about the health of others, people, their friends and family. Most people thought that they themselves would be okay through the pandemic. There was resentment to changes on social interaction restrictions, which meant that most people were cut off from their usual self-care activities and support networks. We faced some challenges with securing food and basic items, which drove fear of almost an apocalyptic event. And I remember for the first time when I walked into Aldi and saw the shelves completely stripped of flour and pasta and tomato sauce and all the basic staples and bloody toilet paper as well, that I thought, oh gee, this is an interesting scenario that we're finding ourselves in. There were people who lost their jobs or were stood down. They suffered a huge blow to their self-esteem. And as well as the ongoing financial stress with that, not knowing how to pay the bills can really ramp up a person's anxiety. Centrelink had huge demand placed on it, and we saw lines of hundreds of people waiting outside ready to be placed on unemployment benefits, and the demand on that service increased exponentially now as we've seen more and more layoffs. Some children, as I mentioned before, were at home and others were at school, which caused confusion for them. Parents were now having to navigate the challenges of homeschooling and also trying to explain things to children that they themselves might not actually have a full grasp on. We also faced issues with loneliness and boredom from isolation or quarantine. We also might have faced anger that other people might not be treating the situation as seriously as ourselves, which is something that I experienced personally as well, where people were violating social distancing practices or stay-at-home orders. It left me quite frustrated about the whole situation. And finally, being stuck at home with the burden of a 24-hour media cycle meant that we were being constantly exposed to worldwide updating death tolls, alarmist media and misinformation that was spreading, as well as just a constant beration around the pandemic. So now that we have an understanding of the effects that COVID-19 had on us, we'll talk about how we recognise and understand anxiety in other people. Anxiety is a universal emotion, and given the nature of the threat that we're experiencing, fear and anxiety are perfectly normal adaptive responses which alert us that we need to be taking action to look after ourselves and those around us. Many people might have heard about the fight or flight response, and this is an important consideration when understanding another person's anxiety as well as our own. It's a simple way of summarising how a person might respond in a situation by either trying to get away from it, fight, or hide from it altogether, which is flight. And we can also understand if a person responds in one way or another, this might give us an indication of how they're managing or not managing their anxiety. For some people, they might be experiencing anxiety for the first time or be experiencing it more intensely than they have before. This can leave people feeling uncertain or confused or noticing bodily sensations that they haven't had to deal with before, which can add to fear and worry and increase anxiety. As well as other underlying mental health issues or pre-existing anxiety, we're not always aware of the kind of stresses or personal issues that the person is carrying with them. And this can influence the interaction that we have when we come across with them. But we'll talk a little bit more about that later in the presentation. A person's mental health can be weakened by large changes in their life, like a pandemic, as well as compounding stresses adding to an already unstable mental health, like having kids home from school or being laid off from work or having increasing financial stresses. Any pre-existing conditions that a person might have to manage on a day-to-day basis can be influenced by in our interaction. Anxiety affects a number of different aspects of the body and mind, And as we go through these signs and symptoms, it's important to note that this is not going to be a checklist for anxiety, and it's unlikely that when we come across a person that they're going to be exhibiting all these signs and symptoms from all the categories. A person might not even appear to be anxious, but still be experiencing anxiety on the inside, just like a person that we come across might appear to be physically healthy, but may well not be. So physically, we have nausea or butterflies in the stomach. This is a classic symptom of anxiety that we can probably all identify with. It's probably the one that we recognise first in ourselves, and it's when our gut is telling us that something is not right. Anxiety can impact our sleep, which can further destabilise our mental health. Sleep is probably one of the most crucial things to keep us with sound mental health, and it's sometimes the first to be impacted when we're anxious or worried. Having trouble sleeping is also a really common sign of anxiety. Other physical symptoms can include having a racing heart or breathlessness in the absence of physical activity, muscular tension, or having changes in our appetite. Moving to the mental symptoms, anxiety can make our brain feel like it's both grinding to a halt and going a million miles an hour at the same time. Ruminating on our troubles can cause us to become stuck in a thought and can lead us on sort of a runaway train of catastrophic thinking, where we tend to focus only on worst case scenarios. We can also fall into a number of different thinking traps where all the thinking that we do only further contributes to our anxiety. This type of thinking can introduce challenges in our ability to complete tasks, make decisions, or focus on what we're trying to get done. It can also make us become forgetful or frustrated with ourselves. Anxiety also impacts a person's behaviours and emotions. Often when we're working with another person, these are the things that we're going to notice about the anxiety in them without understanding what's going on the inside. Behaviourally, as we saw in the last slide, if a person's stuck or constantly ruminating on a thought, their capacity for patience and emotional self-regulation is going to be greatly reduced. As a result, they might become snappy, or they might even tend to avoid people altogether if they're aware that they're not coping very well. We might also notice that they're making more mistakes in their work or are becoming forgetful, which is another sign of a reduced mental capacity. A person might also be skipping meals or increasing their alcohol use. And we've seen in the media that reports that alcohol consumption is increasing during this COVID crisis. And this could be due to a number of factors. It could be boredom, not having any commitments or working from home, or also people self-medicating to numb intense worry or feelings that they might be having. Whatever the reason is, this is an alarming report because alcohol use directly impacts a person's mental and physical health, and it is a short-term solution for a much longer-term problem. And emotional symptoms, the current uncertainty in the world has left people feeling overwhelmed and unsafe, which is quite understandable. As a result, we might notice that people are more emotional than usual, that they're on edge or irritable, or that they're becoming defensive or impatient. So now that we're aware of the effects of anxiety and have an understanding of the mental space a person can be in when we deal with them, let's look at how we can work with that person who is stressed or distressed. So knowing what we do now about signs and symptoms, we should be aware that it's likely that we'll be coming across or noticing more often greater amounts of people with anxiety at different levels. Some people are going to experience anxiety on a much lower level than some other people, just the same that we might find some people who are experiencing a great amount of anxiety where we might think that that doesn't match ours. We also need to recognise that whether we like it or not, we can also be experiencing our own form of anxious distress, and that can impact our interaction with other people. We need to be mindful of the way that we're feeling on a day-to-day basis when we're dealing with others. As medical professionals and in a medical professional setting, people who are presenting themselves to services are likely going to be looking for a number of things: validation of their concerns, respect, compassion and kindness, answers to questions and reassurance about things that are happening for them. They're going to be looking for treatment options, as well as clear and understandable directions about a way forward and strategies to stay well. Health is a huge concern at the moment for people. And as I mentioned before, it's going to be difficult to tell who is experiencing anxiety. That's why it's important when we deal with someone that we try to keep an open mind and deal with things as they come without any predisposition for judgment. In the case that a person's anxiety appears to be overwhelming them, there's a number of things that we can do to improve that experience for both them and us. People who are in distress can be disarmed or de-escalated when we approach the situation by engaging in calm and friendly communication, having a helpful attitude, using their name during the conversation, and using eye contact as well to acknowledge when that person's speaking. These 4 tips themselves go a long way to building rapport with another person, and it can be a deciding factor in how the interaction unfolds, whether it goes well or becomes derailed. Using clear and simple explanations. There was a lot of new terms that we've been introduced to as the COVID situation has unfolded. Things like flattening the curve, social distancing, pandemic, contagion. And to a lay person who might not have a great deal of medical understanding, these words can be difficult to understand and can add to a person's fear or worry about the current circumstances. If we avoid jargon in the explanations that we provide to a person, it's going to ensure that a person's receiving the information in the best possible way and they can understand it and act on it safely. Other things that we can do is to allow a reasonable amount of time and attention to deal with that person, offer them a level of privacy that we would all expect, as well as provide an explanation around what you can and can't do. Boundary setting is an important part of an interaction, and when it feels like it's getting out of hand, can be a useful tool to get the interaction back on track. It offers clear limits about what can or can't be achieved. It can also offer a way out of the conversation and also offer opportunities to follow up with that person at a later time. We need to remember that people with anxiety aren't a ticking time bomb, and they respond best when they're treated like a human, just like we would like to be treated. Communication is key in all interactions, not just interactions with anxious people. When we're dealing with a person who is distressed and we know that they're distressed, they're going to mirror the way that we're engaging in that interaction, and we can use this to our advantage. Calm is contagious, and if we're calm during our interaction, we have the ability to instill calmness in them. And if they escalate their behaviours and we match it, the situation is going to quickly get out of hand. So speaking in a calm and even tone and using their name is going to keep the conversation on track. People want to feel validated, especially when they're feeling uncomfortable or worried. So saying something like, "I understand that you would feel upset," or "I can see that you've been through a lot lately." This is a great way to make a person feel at ease, and that's going to keep the conversation going the way that we want it to go. We want to show compassion and let people know that we care and that we want to help them. We also want to offer hope. Most people who we're coming across are going to be seeking reassurance for something that they're worried about. They're also going to be looking for direct answers for their concerns. The more accurate that we can be in our responses, but being mindful of using medical jargon, the more likely the interaction is going to remain on track and keep that person calm. We want to approach all interactions from a patient-centered approach. This is going to allow them to feel in control and give them the opportunity to make decisions about their treatment for themselves. And they are also going to feel like someone's on their side. And at the end of it all, if a person feels supported and confident at the end of the interaction, we're going to have achieved our goal. So if an interaction appears to be going off track or is becoming overly emotional, it might be best for us to revisit that, the boundaries that we set up at the start of the interaction. Both of these, or we might also need to end the conversation. And both of these actions can be achieved calmly and offer an opportunity for a person to attempt the conversation at another time when they're less emotional. We could say something along the lines of, I can't continue this conversation with you any longer, but I'm happy to give you a call tomorrow to go over the information that I have for you. Or we could say something like, I want to help and have a conversation about this, but I'm having trouble understanding you, so can you please lower your voice? If we treat a person with respect while making these requests, we're likely to get the conversation back on track. If everything's gone well, it's important that we provide an opportunity for that person to ask any questions or seek clarification about some of the things that we've gone over today, and also present them with an opportunity for follow-up later. This is going to strengthen the rapport and the trust that person has with you, and it also leaves them feeling positive about the interaction and likely to seek your help again at another stage. So now we talk about managing our own anxiety through this situation. We've covered the symptoms of anxiety, managing anxiety in others, and we're talking about ourselves now. We need to realise that we're not superhuman and that the changes to society, our families, our support networks, our own work and employment have all affected us in some way or another. And so we need to be considerate of these factors and care for ourselves when we help other people. Some of the basics to looking after ourselves include being aware of our own level of anxiety or distress on a day-to-day basis, or even a moment-by-moment basis when we're engaged in some sort of interaction. We need to use strategies to stay calm or in control using a breathing exercise or some type of grounding exercise. It's important to realise that we don't have to solve all of a person's problems in an interaction, and it helps to be focused on the role that we have to play in that person's treatment. If we have access to information about help that's available, that can also help ourselves, but it can be great to feel prepared when we go into a conversation with someone, knowing that we have places that we can send them for help, or ways that we can follow up for that person by getting accurate information and delivering that to them when they need it. It's okay for us to be able to get help from a colleague or a friend in a situation, and it's also important to have a good support network for debriefing. I'd like to hope that everyone out there has an opportunity for debriefing within a workplace. It's a good way to be able to decompress from a day's work or go through a few situations that might have unfolded to see how we can improve it or do it better next time. And then finally, realise when it's time to take a break. Even though we might not be as busy as we were before, some of the limitations and things in society at the moment have left us feeling exhausted. If we need to take a break, that's okay. And we should also be encouraging other people to take a break if we notice that they're becoming burnt out, or if we notice that they're anxious in themselves. So to make sure that we're able to get out of bed every day and be able to keep doing what we're doing, even facing all these challenges, we need to build resilience. Some of us are naturally more resilient than others, and that's okay. It's just a part of life. We all have our strengths and we all have our weaknesses. There are a number of practical things that we can do to maintain our resilience or build it if we choose to. A routine at this point in time is going to be very important to ensure that we're productive and that hours don't become days and days don't become weeks and weeks don't become years, because it's easy to get trapped in a void when we don't have a lot on. Media can be overwhelming at the moment. It can be a source of huge anxiety for us, and depending on where we get our news from, most of us probably get our news from news websites or social media. It's important to be aware of misinformation. It can spread like wildfire, and it can leave us feeling much worse for wear after we've gone and try and get some reliable information. It's okay to take a break from media. It's okay to log out from Facebook, and it's okay to turn the TV off at dinner time or in the mornings when we're getting ready, when our general news sources are coming from. Make sure that when we are getting information, we're getting it from reliable sources, and make sure we get facts rather than opinions. In this new world, physical distancing doesn't have to mean being socially isolated. We need to change the way we think about connecting with people. Just like tonight is a new way for me to connect with people. I've also been trialling a Friday night Zoom with my mates and having a couple of beers. It's been an interesting way of catching up, especially for a group of mates who are scattered across the East Coast, and we generally only ever catch up every 6 months. It's been a great way of staying in touch, and probably something that we should have thought of doing earlier. And because we've already heard that alcohol consumption's on the rise during this period of isolation, we need to be mindful to regulate our own intake and make sure that we stay healthy and in control. Exercise is a great way to add some variety to our daily routine and also hit some of those physical health goals that we need to be working on. It's also important to know that using our bodies physically can give us a bit of a break emotionally and mentally. It can also improve sleep and diet, which is my next point, and something that I have already touched on. Sleep and diet can be affected when we become stressed, so setting a regular bedtime can be incorporated into our routine. It can establish some good practices for being rested and making sure that our capacity to deal with stress is at its very best. Some people can find relaxation, meditation or mindfulness effective in managing their worry or stress. And there's plenty of good apps out there that can be used as a guide. It's important to know that this works for some people and not for others. I don't find it to be overly useful, but I never discourage a person from having a go at it. It's important that we all try it out. And it can be useful to think about what we've dealt with in the past and some of the outcomes that we've achieved. If we reflect on past situations, we can call on strategies that we've used before to help us get through these current adversities. We might have some hobbies or interests that we haven't used for a while, and it could be worth starting those again, particularly if there's something that we can do from home. It can be a great way to add to our routine, but also break up some of the things that we're doing to add a bit of variety. And as always, if things become too much for us, there's help available. No one is alone in this situation. Even though we're feeling isolated and distant from everyone, we're not alone. There's a lot of places that we can go to for help, and at the moment there's some very good resources online that we can go to for help during the current crisis. There's also plenty of avenues physically for health at the moment that we can still engage with, as well as using video technology. All you have to do is ask for help. Some of the ones that I've got listed at the moment is the newly developed Coronavirus Mental Wellbeing Support Service, which has been developed in partnership with Beyond Blue and the government to address the growing mental health concerns during the pandemic. It offers resources and information for people, factual information, which can be relied on to explain things to ourselves and kids as well. And also connect us to some of those online resources for counselling and professional support. This is also a 24/7 service and can be accessed at any time in a face-to-face way through video. The Head to Health website is something that's been around for a while. It has lists of government-endorsed places that we can go to for help, especially online counselling services and self-help avenues to improve our mental health. All of the things that are listed on this website have been vetted by the Australian government and vouched for by them, so we know that it's reliable, and it's probably a great place to start if we're looking for help for ourselves or other people. Our very own website, ramp.com.au, has downloadable resources that we've developed to address the stress and uncertainty through these times. They're pitched for people who are living in rural and remote areas, but the strategies that we've provided apply to everyone. If you would like to go and have a look at the website, we've also got links to our annual glove box guide, as well as podcasts that we've developed, blog posts, and other general sources of information that we've worked on. The last 2 points that I've provided there, Smiling Mind and Headspace, these are 2 apps that I like to recommend to people. Smiling Mind is a meditation app that's developed by psychologists and educators, and is a great way to dip your toe into the water for mindfulness and meditation if you haven't had a crack before. The Headspace app also provides mental health support and information, as well as mindfulness and meditation strategies, and can be used as a place to get text-based support from another person. The Headspace app does have a few paid features, but some of the free features that are available are very effective. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. I hope that you found the information useful and informative. If there are any questions tonight about anything that I've covered, I'm happy for them to be put in Slido. And just while we're on the topic of Slido, if you use the polls function, there is a way to provide an evaluation and feedback of tonight's presentation. You can use the code RAMHP to log on. Someone's made a comment here saying that they've felt overwhelmed by the number of people shopping and that they were in a panic. And are there any tips to overcome this? This is something that we can reflect on as one of the points that I touched on before. I mentioned that we can feel anger or frustration around people who might not be taking things as seriously as we are. And I noticed as well that when I was downtown, there were a lot more people who just were blatantly flaunting distancing, and it just seemed a lot more packed than usual. So for in those strategies, it can be useful to head to the Headspace app to get some strategies for controlled breathing, something that can help us feel a little bit more under control when we're feeling uneasy. And it can also be useful to use grounding exercises in those cases. It's probably not best if I go through those at the moment, but my information is going to be listed along with this presentation later, and I'm happy to go through those strategies with another person if you'd like to. Give me a call. There's also a lot of information online that can be used for those strategies. I also get frustrated when people aren't social distancing. It's going to be the way that we're going to get through this situation together if we all follow the rules. Just in the case that there's a few more questions or comments coming through, I'll just remind you that you can head to our website and use the postcode locator to find your nearest ramp coordinator. We've got a number of different training packages to offer people information and tips for dealing with mental health. We can also customise the training to meet anyone's needs. Oh, I've just been given a note here that the Headspace app is a US product as opposed to the Headspace Youth Mental Health Services that we're probably all more familiar with, which target the 12 to 25 age bracket. So let's just be mindful when we're using that app. Great. Well, that's all from me tonight. Don't forget, use the Slido poll and use the code RAMHP. This can help us improve the content that we deliver, and it can let us know how you thought about the training tonight. So thank you very much for being here. And if you'd like to get in touch with me, I'm more than happy to provide any follow-up information or direct you to places for support. Thank you.